You might have noticed that so far, all the arrays had primitive data types stored in them. Well, there's a reason for that. Arrays can only hold primitive data types. So we need a way to store objects in the same way. This is where an array list can really help. Another benefit of an array list is that you can increase and decrease the size dynamically. It's not a fixed size. The downside of array lists is they take up a little bit more overhead. So an array is a good choice if you do know the size of your array and you're only dealing with primitive data. Okay, let's talk about a realistic example. Remember our real estate business? It might be nice to keep track of many properties without having to create new variables each time. Instead, we can create an instance of the property class and use an array list to store all of them together under one name. Let's review the syntax for an array list. I have a new project started called Real Estate MLS. I'm going to go ahead and add javautil.scanner just in case. Import java.util.scanner. Okay, in the main part of my program, this is how we define an array list. We type in the word, just like I said, array list. Now, array list is a capital A and a capital L. It's very important because remember, Java is case sensitive. Now, this is new. We're going to add an angle bracket. If you've programmed in HTML, you're used to the angle brackets. But in our case, inside the angle brackets, we have to specify the type of objects we're going to put in there, and we're going to put property objects in there. So we type in the word property, and we put a close angle bracket. Now, we need to give this a name. So let's go ahead and just call it MLS for multiple listing equals a new array list. Array lists are also classes and objects, so you have to instantiate them. On the right-hand side, I'm going to tell it that it's going to be the property class again. And this time, I'm just going to put an open and close parenthesis and a semicolon. You do not provide the size of the array list because it dynamically grows and shrinks. Okay, it looks like I have an error. Let's see what it is. Cannot find symbol class array list. Oh, I forgot that we have to include the library for the array list. Okay, let's do that next. So we're going to import java.util.ArrayList. There it is. Okay, that should clear that error up. Now, if we think of the example from before, we created two property objects. One was for land and one was for an estate. So let's go ahead and do the same thing here, but this time we're going to add the objects to our MLS array list. I still have to create the property object. So property, and we'll just call it P1 this time, is equal to a new property. And we want to say the first one will make land. So we'll say it's worth $10,000. The type is land, and the acreage is 3.5. Okay, now I can add P1 to my MLS array list. So MLS dot. Now notice that it's different. I don't use the square brackets to get at the elements. Instead, I'm going to use the dot add. And in parentheses, I tell it what to add. It automatically assumed I want to add P1, and it is correct. So I'll leave that there. Now I can reuse my P1 property because I already added it to my array list. So now I can say P1 is equal to new property, and I can create a new property. This time we'll make it an estate. Let's make it 230,000, comma, it's an estate. It is on 2 acres. It has 2 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms. Okay, and again, I can add this one to my array list. Now I have 2 properties inside the MLS array list. When you're working with arrays, as I stated, to access the elements of an array list is different than accessing the elements in an array. If you wanted to get at an individual element, you use the .get method. If you want to change an element, you use the .set method. If you want to get rid of an element, you use .remove, and we already saw how to use .add. Okay, let's print out our array list. I'm going to do MLS.toString. If I run my program the way it is, we can see that it'll print out these 2 properties. Asking price is $1,000 for land. The acre size is 3.5, no baths, no bedrooms. The asking price of the second property is $230,000. It's an estate with a lot size of 2 acres, 2 baths, and 3 bedrooms. Okay, if I go back up to my program, let's try this. Let's remove one of the items from our list. I'm going to use mls.remove, and in parentheses, I'm going to tell it to remove the one at the index value of 1. Do you know which one it's going to remove? Well, I need to print the array list back out again so I can see which one is missing. So I'm just going to put the word after here, so we know which listing is before and which listing is after. Okay, let's try it again. You can see that land is still there. Remember, array lists, just like an array, position 0 would have been land and position 1 was estate, so I deleted the estate. When trying to decide whether to use an array or an array list, consider the type of data you need to keep track of. If it is susceptible to change, you might want to use an array list. If it is mixed data types, then you have to use an array list. Okay, well, I hope this cleared up the difference between arrays and array lists.